My name is Leontine, 42 years old, and I'm sitting in a conference room that smells of stale coffee and arrogance. Her lawyer, all slick suit and smug grin, slides a paper across the table. Your children want nothing from you, he says, like it's a done deal. My fingers tighten around a sealed envelope, its edges worn from months in my pocket. It's not about revenge. It's about what I know. Her lies, her secrets, all caught in one photograph inside. I slide it toward him. His smirk falters. If you've ever held a truth too heavy to speak, stay with me. The conference room door clicks shut behind me, and I'm alone with the weight of that envelope now in the lawyer's hands. I walk to my truck, the parking lot gravel crunching under my boots. My chest is tight, not from anger, but from something heavier, like I've been carrying a brick for years. I drive home, the radio off, replaying that night 3 years ago when it all started to crack. I was 39 hands, always smelling of motor oil from the shop. My wife Anita had been different for months. She'd leave the room to take calls, her voice low like she was guarding something. I'd ask, and she'd smile, say it was work, her accounting job keeping her late. I believed her because I wanted to. We had 2 kids, a mortgage, a life I thought was solid. But that night, I was fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen, the house quiet, except for the drip. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and I glanced over, not thinking much of it. Then I heard her upstairs on another phone, her voice soft, almost a whisper. He doesn't suspect, she said. My hands froze on the wrench. I stood there, water dripping into the sink, each plink louder than the last. My first thought wasn't anger, it was shame. Shame for even hearing it, for doubting her. Maybe it was nothing, I told myself. Maybe it was work, like she said. But my gut twisted a knot I couldn't loosen. I didn't storm upstairs or yell. I tightened the faucet, wiped my hands, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the linoleum. The kids were asleep, and the house felt too big, like it was holding its breath. The next morning, Anita was all smiles, making pancakes, asking our son about his soccer game. I watched her flip the spatula, her hands steady, and wondered how she could act so normal. I wanted to ask about the call, but my tongue felt heavy. What if I was wrong? What if I sounded like some jealous fool? Instead, I sipped my coffee, nodded at her small talk, and went to work. At the shop, I told Clarence, my best friend since high school, about the call. He leaned against a toolbox, wiping grease off his hands, and squinted at me. You're seeing ghosts, man, he said. Talk to her. She's your wife, not some stranger. I nodded, but his words didn't settle me. Clarence was single, no kids, no clue what it felt like to have your whole world balanced on someone else's truth. I kept quiet, but I started watching her closer. Her phone was always locked now, passcode changed. She'd leave for work early, come back late, her purse stuffed with receipts she didn't show me. I told myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake that whisper. He doesn't suspect. A week later, I found the receipt. It was buried in her purse, crumpled under a pack of gum. I wasn't snooping, just looking for change while she was in the shower. The paper was from a hotel an hour away, near the old worksite where I used to fix rigs before the shop. 2 nights, king bed, paid in cash. The date was a weekend. She told me she was visiting her sister. I stood in the bedroom, the receipt in my hand, her shower humming in the background. My heart pounded, not fast but hard, like it was trying to break through my ribs. I didn't confront her. I folded the receipt, slipped it into my wallet, and went to work. At the shop, I couldn't focus. I dropped a socket wrench twice, cursed under my breath. Clarence noticed, asked what was wrong. I didn't tell him about the receipt. It felt too raw, like admitting I'd lost something I couldn't name. Instead, I kept it to myself, turning it over in my head. That hotel wasn't just any place. It was where I'd taken her years ago, early in our marriage, a weekend we'd laughed about because the AC broke and we slept with the windows open, listening to crickets. She'd chosen that place of all places to lie to me. The betrayal wasn't just in the act, it was in the memory she tainted. I started keeping a mental log. Dates she was gone, excuses she gave, the way her eyes slid away when I asked about her day. I didn't want to be this guy, the one checking up on his wife, but I couldn't stop. Each lie I caught, small ones, like saying she was at the grocery store when her car wasn't in the lot, added weight to that brick in my chest. I'd lie awake at night, her breathing steady beside me, wondering who she was when I wasn't looking. One evening, I was cleaning out the truck, tossing old coffee cups, when I found a parking stub under the passenger seat. Another hotel, same one, different weekend. I sat in the driver's seat, the stub in my hand, the streetlight casting shadows through the windshield. I didn't feel angry, not yet. It was colder than that, like I was watching my life from outside myself. I tucked the stub next to the receipt in my wallet, closed the glove box, and went inside. Anita was on the couch, scrolling her phone, her face lit by the screen. She looked up, smiled, and asked if I wanted takeout. Sure, I said, my voice flat. I sat across from her, watching her tap out an order, wondering how long I could keep this quiet. I watched Anita order takeout, her fingers quick on the phone, her face calm like nothing was wrong. The living room smelled of her lavender candle, the one she lit to relax. I sat on the recliner, my wallet heavy in my pocket, with that receipt and parking stub. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice even, agreeing to Chinese. She didn't look up, just nodded, and I felt like a ghost in my own house. Dinner came, and we ate in silence, the kids at a friend's house. The lo mein tasted like cardboard, but I chewed mechanically, my eyes on her. She talked about a co-worker's promotion, some guy named Greg, her voice light like she was sharing a normal day. I wondered if Greg was the one she'd been meeting, if his name was on those hotel receipts. I didn't ask. Instead, I cleared the table, scraping plates into the trash, my hands moving on autopilot. She went to bed early, saying she was tired. I stayed up, the TV flickering, with some game show I wasn't watching. The next day at the shop, I was under a sedan tightening a bolt when my mind kept drifting to her phone. It was always with her now, even in the bathroom. I'd never been the kind of guy to snoop, but the weight of that parking stub changed something. I finished the job, wiped my hands, and drove to an electronics store on my lunch break. The clerk, a kid with a patchy beard, showed me a cheap burner phone. I bought it, no questions, and set it up in the truck, my fingers clumsy on the tiny keys. I didn't know what I was doing, not exactly, but I needed something she couldn't trace. That night, I waited until she was asleep, her phone charging on her nightstand. I slipped out to the garage, the air cool and sharp with the smell of oil. I sat on a stool, the burner phone in one hand and dialed a number I'd found in her call log, one she hadn't saved. It rang twice before a man's voice answered, low and cautious. "Hello?" I froze my thumb, hovering over the end call button. "Who's this?" he asked. I hung up, my heart thudding. I didn't know his voice, but I knew it wasn't a coworker talking shop at 11 at night. I went back inside, the house dark, except for the glow of the kitchen clock. I stood at the sink, gripping the counter, staring at my reflection in the window. My face looked older, lines deeper around my eyes. I wasn't sure who I was becoming, this guy sneaking around calling strangers from a burner phone. But I couldn't stop. The next morning, I checked her phone bill online, something I'd never done in 15 years of marriage. There it was, that number called dozens of times, over months, always late at night. I saved a screenshot to my laptop, password protected, and closed it before she woke up. At work, Clarence caught me staring at nothing, a wrench loose in my hand. "You good?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I shrugged, said it was just a long week. He didn't push, but his eyes lingered like he knew I was lying. I wanted to tell him about the phone call, the number, but the words stuck. Admitting it felt like admitting I'd failed, like I'd let my marriage rot under my nose. Instead, I threw myself into work, fixing cars, until my hands ached trying to drown out the noise in my head. Anita started leaving earlier for work, her excuses sharper now. Client meetings, she said, or audits running late. I nodded, my face blank, but I started checking her car's odometer when she got home. The numbers didn't add up too many miles for a trip to the office. I wrote them down in a notebook I kept in my toolbox, hidden under a pile of rags. Each entry felt like a betrayal, not of her, but of myself. I'd built a life on trust, on believing we were a team. Now I was counting miles, tracking lies. One evening, she came home late, her hair slightly messy, her blouse wrinkled. She said she'd been at a team dinner, but I smelled no wine, no restaurant grease. I asked how it went, keeping my tone light. "Fine," she said, brushing past me to the fridge. My eyes followed her, catching the way her hand trembled as she poured water. I didn't push, didn't ask about the miles or the man's voice on the phone. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending. The notebook in my toolbox was filling up, and each page made it harder to stay quiet. Anita's hand trembled as she poured water, and I stood there, the kitchen clock ticking too loud. I wanted to ask about the miles, the man's voice, but my throat locked up. Instead, I said goodnight and went to the garage, my notebook waiting in the toolbox. I flipped it open, the odometer numbers staring back like accusations. I added another entry, my pen digging into the paper. The truth was piling up, and I was running out of ways to ignore it. The next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I downloaded a tracking app on my phone, linked it to hers when she left it on the counter during breakfast. I hated myself for it, my fingers hesitating over the install button. The kids were at the table, my daughter scrolling her phone, my son shoveling cereal. Anita was packing her lunch, humming softly. I tapped install, my stomach churning. By noon, the app pinged. She wasn't at her office. She was at that hotel again, an hour away. I stared at the dot on the map, my hands cold around my coffee mug at the shop. I didn't tell Clarence. He'd already called me paranoid, and this felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. Instead, I worked late, tearing apart an engine, the grind of metal keeping my thoughts at bay. But the app pinged again, another trip, same hotel 2 days later. I saved the data screenshots, piling up on my laptop. Each one felt like a cut, not deep, but enough to bleed slow. I wasn't just tracking her now. I was building a case, though I didn't know for what. That evening, I couldn't hold it in anymore. The kids were at soccer practice, and Anita was on the couch, her phone glowing in her lap. I sat across from her, my hands clasped tight to keep them still. "Where were you today?" I asked, my voice low, steady. She looked up, her eyes narrowing just enough to notice. "Work," she said, like always. I leaned forward, my pulse steady but hard. "The hotel, Anita. You were there again." Her face didn't change, but her fingers tightened around her phone. "You're checking up on me," she said, her voice sharp, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "You're being controlling, Leontine. This isn't healthy." I felt the air shift, like she'd flipped the script. My jaw clenched, but I didn't raise my voice. "I saw the app," I said. "You weren't at work." She stood, her movements quick, and walked to the kitchen. "You're paranoid," she said over her shoulder. "I'm not doing this." I followed her, my boots heavy on the floor. "Just tell me the truth," I said, my voice still, even though my chest was burning. She spun around, her eyes flashing. "The truth. You're the one sneaking around, acting like I'm the enemy. I'm trying to keep this family together." Her words hit like a slap, not because they were true, but because she believed she could sell them. I stood there, my hands in my pockets, feeling the weight of that notebook in the garage. I didn't mention the app again, didn't mention the hotel. I just nodded, walked away, and let the silence swallow us. At dinner, the kids were back, and the tension hung like damp air. My daughter poked at her food, her earbuds in, shutting out the world. My son glanced between us, his fork pausing mid-bite. Anita talked about her day, some story about a client, her voice smooth, practiced. I chewed my steak, tasting nothing, my mind on the screenshots, the hotel, the man's voice from the burner phone. The kids didn't ask questions, but their silence felt heavier than mine. They knew something was wrong, even if they didn't have words for it. The next day, I called Marjorie, a co-worker who'd been through a divorce years ago. We met at a diner near the shop, the kind with cracked vinyl seats and coffee that tasted like ash. She listened as I told her about the app, the hotel, Anita's lies. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp, like she'd seen this story before. "You need proof," she said, stirring her coffee. "Not just feelings. Hard evidence, or she'll turn it on you." I nodded, my throat tight, and thanked her. She reached out, touched my arm, then pulled back like she'd crossed a line. I didn't say anything, just stared at the ground, the leaves crunching under my boots. I started documenting everything. Hotel receipts, odometer readings, screenshots of the tracking app. I kept a folder on my laptop, locked behind a password Anita didn't know. Each file felt like a brick in a wall I was building, not to trap her, but to keep myself from falling apart. I didn't sleep much, my mind racing with what I'd find next. At night, I'd lie beside her, her breathing soft, and wonder how she could sleep so easily. The gap between us wasn't just in the bed, it was in every word she didn't say, every truth she buried. I sat on the couch, The house dark, the glow of my phone fading as I locked the screen. Anita was still at the law firm, her car a dot on the app's map mocking me with every second it didn't move. I didn't sleep that night, just lay in bed, her side empty, the sheets cold. My mind churned, piecing together the credit card charges, the keychain, the law firm visits. It wasn't just an affair anymore. It was a plan, one she'd built while I was fixing cars and paying our bills. The next evening, I couldn't take it. I told the kids I was running to the store, grabbed my keys, and drove to that hotel, the one from the receipts. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest felt like it was caving in. I parked across the street, the neon sign flickering in the dusk. Her car was there, in the lot next to a black sedan I didn't recognize. I didn't go inside. I just sat the engine off, watching the lobby doors. Then I saw her. Through a window near the bar, Anita was sitting with a man, his back to me, but I knew him. Greg, her co-worker, the one she'd mentioned too casually. He'd come to our house once years ago, asking for a loan to cover his car payment. I'd given him $200, no questions, because Anita vouched for him. Now they were laughing, her hand brushing his arm, her smile one I hadn't seen in years. My breath got sharp and shallow. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and snapped a photo through the window, the flash of the image blurry but clear enough. I drove home, the photo burning a hole in my pocket. The kids were in the living room, my daughter on her phone, my son watching a movie. Anita wasn't back yet. I went to the garage, opened my laptop, and saved the photo in my folder next to the receipts and screenshots. My hands were clumsy, missing the keys, and I realized I was trembling. Not with anger, but with something heavier, grief maybe for the life I thought we had. I closed the laptop, leaned against the workbench, and stared at the concrete floor, the cracks spidering out like my thoughts. When Anita came home, she moved through the house like nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek, her lips cold, and asked if I'd eaten. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. She went to shower, and I sat at the kitchen table, the photo on my phone staring back at me. I wanted to throw the phone across the room to demand answers, but I didn't. I just sat there, the clock ticking, her footsteps soft upstairs. The kids went to bed, and the house fell quiet, but my head was loud, screaming with what I'd seen. The next morning, I called Clarence. We met at his place, a small apartment cluttered with car magazines and empty beer cans. I showed him the photo, my voice flat, as I explained where I'd taken it. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. "You gotta leave her, man," he said, his voice low, like he was afraid to say it too loud. "She's playing you." I looked at him, my best friend, and saw pity in his eyes. It stung worse than the photo. "I don't know what to do," I said, and it was the truth. I had the kids, the house, 15 years of memories. Walking away wasn't simple. I went back home, the photo still on my phone, my folder now a vault of her lies. I was in the garage staring at my toolbox when the mail arrived. I wasn't expecting anything, but there it was, divorce papers delivered by a courier who didn't meet my eyes. I stood in the driveway, the envelope heavy in my hands, my name typed in cold black ink. Inside was a letter from her lawyer claiming I was unstable, unfit, that the kids wanted to stay with her. My knees buckled, not from shock, but from the weight of it all collapsing. I leaned against the mailbox, the papers crinkling in my grip, and felt the world tilt like I was falling with nowhere to land. I stood in the driveway, the divorce papers crumpling in my fist, the courier's taillights fading down the street. The lawyer's letter burned in my mind, unstable, unfit, the kids choosing her. I walked inside the house too quiet and slid the envelope into a drawer in the garage next to my laptop. My hands shook, not from anger, but from something colder, like the ground had vanished beneath me. I couldn't face Anita, not yet. I grabbed my keys and drove, no destination, just away. The road blurred, streetlights streaking past like warnings. I ended up at a gas station, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights, and a clerk who didn't look up. I sat in my truck, the engine off, the papers, words looping in my head. Unstable. I'd spent years keeping it together, paying bills, coaching my son's team, fixing her car when it broke down. Now she twisted it, made me the problem. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, and stared at the dashboard, trying to breathe. When I got home, Anita was in the kitchen chopping vegetables, the knife's rhythm steady. She glanced up, her eyes skimming over me like I was furniture. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, her voice light, like we were still a family. I nodded, my throat too tight to answer, and went to the living room. My daughter was on the couch, texting, her face closed off. My son was upstairs, his door shut. I sat in the recliner, the divorce papers heavy in my mind, and watched Anita move through the kitchen, her ease a blade in my chest. At dinner, the silence was thicker than ever. My daughter pushed her peas around, her earbuds dangling. My son ate quickly, his eyes on his plate. Anita talked about a work deadline, her voice filling the space, but I barely heard her. I kept seeing Greg's hand on her arm, the hotel bar's dim light, the lawyer's letter claiming my kids didn't want me. I chewed my food, tasting nothing, my hands resting on the table to hide their trembling. After dinner, I went to the garage, opened the drawer and pulled out the papers. I read them again, each word a punch. The lawyer claimed I'd been distant, erratic, that the kids felt safer with her. I thought of my daughter's silence, my son's cautious glances. Had she turned them against me? I opened my laptop, the photo of Anita and Greg, staring back, their laughter frozen in time. I added it to the folder, my fingers slow, deliberate, like I was burying something. I heard the front door open, Anita leaving for a supposed errand. I checked the app. She was headed to the law firm again, the same building she'd visited twice this week. My chest tightened, not with surprise, but with a dull, grinding pain. She wasn't just cheating, she was rewriting our life, painting me as the failure to justify her choices. I closed the laptop, my eyes burning, and sat on the garage floor, the concrete cold against my palms. I didn't cry, didn't yell. I just sat staring at the wall, the weight of her lies pressing down until I couldn't feel anything at all. I sat on the garage floor, the concrete biting into my palms, the divorce papers still in the drawer. Anita's car was a dot on the app, parked at the law firm again. The silence in my head wasn't empty anymore. It was sharp, like a blade I'd been sharpening without knowing. I stood, my knees stiff, and opened my laptop. The folder was there, heavy with screenshots, receipts, the photo of her and Greg. I wasn't going to let her rewrite me out of my kids' lives. I spent the next morning at the shop, quieter than usual, my hands steady on a torque wrench, but my mind elsewhere. I called a guy I knew, Harold, a part-time bookkeeper who'd helped with the shop's taxes. We met at a coffee shop, the kind with sticky tables and weak brew. I slid him a list of dates and charges from the credit card statement I'd found. "Can you trace this?" I asked, my voice low. He nodded, his glasses fogging from his coffee. "I'll see what I can find." He said no questions, just a glance that said he understood. By evening, Harold texted me a file. I opened it in the garage, the kids at a friend's house. Anita out again. The file showed transfers from our joint account to an account I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, then thousands starting 6 months ago. The name on the account was Greg's. My breath caught, not from shock but from clarity. She hadn't just been meeting him, she'd been funneling our money to him. I printed the file, my hand steady, and added it to the folder next to the photo. It wasn't just proof of her affair. It was proof she'd stolen from us, from the kids. I didn't tell Clarence or Marjorie. This wasn't their fight. I drove to a print shop the next day, my lunch break cut short. I made copies of the photo, the bank transfers, the tracking app data, every piece of evidence I'd collected. The clerk didn't look at me, just handed over the stack in a manila envelope. I sealed it, wrote nothing on it, and tucked it into my toolbox, the weight of it grounding me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, like I was fixing a car that wouldn't start, methodically checking every part. At home, Anita was in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup, the air thick with the smell of onions. She smiled, asked if I'd had a good day. I nodded, my face blank, and went to the living room. My daughter was on the couch, her phone glowing, her eyes avoiding mine. My son was upstairs, his music faint through the ceiling. I sat in the recliner, the envelope's weight in my mind, and watched Anita move through the kitchen, her ease a lie I could see through now. I didn't confront her. I didn't need to. The envelope was enough for now. The next day, I got a call from the lawyer's office, scheduling the divorce meeting. The woman on the phone was curt, like I was an inconvenience. I said I'd be there, my voice flat. I hung up and went to the garage, pulling the envelope from my toolbox. I opened it, checked the contents, photo bank statements, app data. Everything was there, neat, undeniable. I sealed it again, my fingers steady, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew it was time to stop hiding. I stood in the garage, the envelope in my jacket pocket, its edges pressing against my chest. Anita was still in the kitchen, the clink of her spoon against the pot, a rhythm I used to find comforting. Now, it was just noise. I walked back inside, past the living room, where my daughter scrolled her phone, her silence louder than any words. I didn't look at her, didn't want to see the distance in her eyes. Upstairs, my son's music pulsed faintly, a reminder of the life I was fighting for. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the house still dark. I checked the envelope again, running my thumb over the seal, making sure it was real. I drove to the shop early, the streets empty, the air cold against my face, through the open window. At my workbench, I pulled out a small notebook, not the one from before, but a new one. I wrote down what I wanted from the divorce meeting: shared custody, no lies about my stability, a fair split of what we'd built. My handwriting was steady, each word a choice I hadn't made until now. I called Harold again, asking if he could dig deeper into the bank transfers. He met me at the shop during my break, his laptop open on a crate. He showed me more transactions linked to Greg's account, some tied to a car lease, others to a gym membership we didn't share. "It's your money, Leontine," he said, his voice quiet. "She's been draining you." I nodded, my jaw tight, and added the new printouts to the envelope. It wasn't about the money. It was about her thinking she could erase me. At home, Anita was getting ready for work, her purse slung over her shoulder. She mentioned a late meeting, her eyes skimming past mine. I said nothing, just watched her leave, the door clicking shut. I checked the app. She wasn't headed to the office, but to a restaurant downtown. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. The envelope in my pocket was enough a weight I carried, not out of anger, but purpose. The day of the meeting came. I dressed in my best shirt, ironed it myself, the steam hissing as I pressed out every wrinkle. The kids were at school, unaware of what was coming. I drove to the law firm, the envelope in my jacket, my hands steady on the wheel. The building was all glass and sharp edges, the kind of place that made you feel small. I walked into the conference room, the lawyer already there, his tie too bright, his smile too wide. Anita sat across from him, her face composed like she'd already won. He started talking, his voice slick, laying out terms that cut me out: full custody, to her the house, most of our savings. "Your children made their choice," he said, his smirk curling. I didn't flinch. My hand rested on the envelope. Its contents a truth I'd held for too long. I slid it across the table, my eyes locked on his. "Read it," I said, my voice low, steady. His fingers paused, his smirk faltering, and I felt the air shift like the moment before a storm breaks. The lawyer's fingers hesitated over the envelope, his smirk gone, replaced by a flicker of unease. Anita's eyes darted to me, then to the table, her hands folding tight in her lap. I leaned back in the chair, the conference room's fluorescent hum loud in the silence. He opened the envelope, pulled out the photo, first his brow creasing as he studied it. Then the bank statements, the printouts of transfers to Greg's account. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Anita's breath caught a small sound, but I didn't look at her. "This changes things," the lawyer said finally, his voice clipped, no trace of his earlier smugness. He shuffled the papers, glancing at Anita, who sat frozen, her face pale. "I want shared custody," I said, my words flat, deliberate. "Half the time with my kids, no lies about me being unfit." The lawyer nodded slow, like he was recalculating. Anita's eyes stayed on the table, her fingers twisting her wedding ring. I left the meeting, the envelope lighter in my pocket, but the weight in my chest heavier. Driving home, the city blurred past horns and traffic lights, a distant hum. I'd won something, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like cutting a piece of myself away. At home, I found a letter from the lawyer, waiting, confirming shared custody was on the table. I read it in the garage, the words blurring as my eyes burned. Not from relief, but from the realization that my kids might still believe her version of me. I moved out that weekend, renting a one-bedroom apartment across town, the kind with thin walls and a buzzing fridge. I took only what I needed: a mattress, a folding chair, a box of clothes. The kids stayed with Anita, their visits scheduled like appointments. My daughter's first text came that night, short and sharp. "Why did you do this to Mom?" it read. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button, but no words came. I set the phone down, the apartment's silence swallowing me. At the shop, I kept my head down, focusing on carburetors and oil changes. Clarence tried to talk, his voice cautious, asking how I was holding up. "Fine," I said, my hands buried in an engine grease, smearing my knuckles. He didn't push, just handed me a wrench when I dropped mine. Marjorie stopped by my workbench, her eyes soft but searching. "You did what you had to," she said, her voice low so the others wouldn't hear. I nodded, not meeting her gaze, and tightened a bolt until my fingers ached. My son called the next day, asking to meet. I suggested a diner near his school, one we used to go to after his games. He showed up, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his face guarded. We sat in a booth, the vinyl creaking under us. He ordered a milkshake, stirred it without drinking, and asked why I'd moved out. I looked at him, his eyes so much like mine, and chose my words carefully. "Your mom made choices," I said, keeping my voice even. "I had to protect us." He nodded slow, but didn't ask more, his straw bending under his fingers. I drove back to the apartment, the diner's neon sign fading in my rearview. The mattress was still on the floor, the room bare, except for a lamp I'd bought at a thrift store. I sat on the edge, my phone in my hand, my daughter's text still unanswered. The silence wasn't just in the room, it was in me, a hollow space where trust used to be. I opened a blank message, my fingers pausing, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat waiting to break. I stared at the blinking cursor, my daughter's text still unanswered on my phone. The apartment's bare walls closed in the lamp, casting long shadows across the floor. I typed a reply, "Just want to see you, kid," then deleted it. My fingers hovered, empty of words that could bridge the gap. I set the phone down, the screen going dark, and leaned back on the mattress, the springs creaking under my weight. Sleep didn't come, just the hum of the fridge and my own uneven breathing. The next day at the shop, I felt eyes on me, the other mechanics glancing over, their voices low. Word had spread, small towns talk fast. I kept my head down, tightening bolts, but their whispers stung like I was the one who'd broken everything. Marjorie pulled me aside at lunch, her coffee cup steaming in her hands. "You don't have to explain," she said, her voice soft but firm. I nodded, my throat tight, and went back to work, the wrench cold in my grip. My daughter didn't text again, but my son showed up at the apartment unannounced, his sneakers scuffing the hallway floor. He stood in the doorway, his backpack slung low, looking at the bare room like it was a stranger's. "You okay here, Dad?" he asked, his voice small. I forced a smile, gestured to the folding chair. "It's temporary," I said, but the words felt thin, like they couldn't hold his doubt. We ordered pizza, ate on the floor, the box between us. He talked about school, his voice halting like he was testing the air. I listened, nodding, but the space between his words felt like a canyon. Anita called later that week, her voice clipped, asking about the kids' schedules. I kept it short, confirming pickup times, my tone flat. She didn't mention the envelope, the meeting, or Greg. Neither did I. But her silence wasn't relief. It was a wall one I'd helped build by staying quiet too long. I hung up the phone, heavy in my hand, and checked my bank account. The legal fees had gutted it, leaving just enough for rent and groceries. I closed the laptop, my eyes on the bare wall, the math of my life adding up to less than I'd planned. I saw Clarence at the shop, his usual grin gone. He handed me a coffee, his hand lingering on the cup. "You should have told me how bad it was," he said, his voice low like he was apologizing. I shrugged, sipped the coffee, its bitterness sharp on my tongue. Didn't know how I said, and it was true. I'd carried it alone. And now the weight was spreading, changing how people looked at me, how I looked at myself. My daughter's silence grew louder. I drove to her school one afternoon, hoping to catch her after practice. She was with friends, her backpack slung over one shoulder, laughing until she saw me. Her smile dropped, her eyes sliding away. I waved, but she turned, walking off with her friends, her ponytail swinging like a door shutting. I stood by my truck, the air cold, my hand still raised, frozen in the moment she chose not to see me. I stood by my truck, my daughter's ponytail fading into the crowd, her friends' laughter echoing in the school parking lot. My hand dropped heavy, and I climbed into the cab, the door creaking shut. The drive back to my apartment was quiet. No radio, just the hum of tires on asphalt. I didn't feel angry, not anymore. It was something softer, like the ache of a bruise you only notice when you press it. I parked, sat for a moment, and let the engine's heat fade. Inside, the apartment smelled of fresh paint, a pale blue I'd rolled onto the walls last weekend. It wasn't much, just a way to make the space mine. I set my keys on the counter, the clink loud in the empty room. My son's visit had left a pizza box on the floor, crumbs scattered like a map of our talk. I swept them up, the broom's rhythm, steady, and thought about his question. "You okay here, Dad?" I hadn't answered fully, just nodded, but the truth was, I was starting to be. Work became my anchor. I showed up early, stayed late, my hands moving through engines with a precision I hadn't felt in months. The shop's noise, clanging tools, hissed curses, felt like a pulse I could match. Clarence didn't bring up the divorce anymore, just tossed me a rag when I needed one. His silence a kind of respect. I started taking on extra jobs, rebuilding a carburetor for a regular, fixing a neighbor's lawnmower for free. Each task felt like stacking bricks, building something I could stand on. My son came by again, this time on a Saturday. He brought a soccer ball, scuffed and faded, and we kicked it around in the apartment complex's courtyard, the grass patchy under our feet. He didn't talk about his mom, and I didn't ask. Instead, he told me about a goal he'd scored, his voice lifting as he described the shot. I listened, my chest loosening, and passed the ball back, my boots scuffing the dirt. For an hour, it was just us, the ball's thud, a conversation we didn't need words for. I bought a small table for the apartment second-hand, its surface scratched but sturdy. I set it by the window where the morning light came through thin curtains. I started eating there instead of on the floor, my coffee mug leaving rings on the wood. It wasn't much, but it felt like a choice, like I was deciding to live here, not just exist. I opened my notebook, not the one from the garage, but a new one, and wrote a single line, "I'm still their father." The pen felt heavy, but the words were light, like letting out a breath I'd held too long. Clarence invited me to a barbecue at his place, a small gathering, just a few guys from the shop and some neighbors. I almost said no, my instinct to stay alone still strong, but I went. The air smelled of charcoal and grilled meat, the backyard crowded with folding chairs and kids running around. A woman named Ruth, a neighbor I'd seen but never spoken to, handed me a beer, her smile easy but not pushy. "You're the mechanic, right?" she asked, her voice warm. I nodded, said yeah, and we talked about nothing. Weather cars, the town. It was the first time in months I didn't feel like I was carrying a sign that said broken. I drove home that night, the beer's buzz faint, Ruth's smile lingering in my mind. Not because I wanted something from her, but because it felt good to be seen as just a guy, not a story. I parked, climbed the stairs, and stood in my doorway, the apartment's blue walls catching the streetlight's glow. I didn't turn on the lamp, just sat at the table, my hands flat on the wood, the quiet settling around me like dust. I sat at the table, the streetlight's glow pooling on the scratched wood, my hand still against its surface. The apartment was quiet, not empty, just waiting. I pulled out the notebook, its pages creased from use, and wrote another line. "I don't need her to see me." The words felt solid like stones I'd set down one by one. I closed the book, slid it into a drawer, and stood my boots, scuffing the floor. The act of writing wasn't about answers, it was about claiming space. The next morning, I drove to pick up my son for his weekend visit. He was waiting on the curb, his soccer bag slung over his shoulder, his face less guarded than before. We didn't talk much on the drive, just let the radio hum between us. At the apartment, he dropped his bag and asked to play cards. We sat at the table, dealing hands of gin rummy, the cards worn at the edges. He laughed when I misplayed a sound I hadn't heard in months. I didn't push him to talk about his mom or the divorce. I just shuffled dealt again and let the moment be enough. Work settled into a rhythm. I started teaching a new guy at the shop, a kid named Felix, all eager hands and bad jokes. I showed him how to balance a tire, my voice steady as I explained the machine's quirks. He listened, nodded, and didn't ask about my life. I liked that. It was clean, just the work, the hum of the shop filling the gaps. When I caught Clarence watching, his nod was small, like he saw I was finding my footing. My daughter still kept her distance. I saw her at a school game sitting in the bleachers with her friends, her eyes skimming past me. I didn't wave. This time, just watched her cheer, her ponytail bouncing. The ache was still there, but softer, like a scar you only feel in cold weather. I drove home, the stadium lights fading in my rear view, and didn't text her. She'd come when she was ready, or she wouldn't. I couldn't carry that weight anymore. Ruth showed up at the shop one day, her car's alternator shot. I fixed it, my hands moving through the job with ease, and charged her half price. She leaned against the counter as I wrote up the invoice, her eyes crinkling when she smiled. "You're good at this," she said, "not just the car stuff." I shrugged, handed her the keys, and said thanks. We didn't talk long, but her voice stayed with me, a reminder of what normal could feel like. I started running in the evenings, down the cracked sidewalks near the apartment, my breath steady in the cool air. The rhythm of my steps matched the thoughts I didn't say aloud. I wasn't running from anything, just moving, letting the burn in my legs carry what my words couldn't. One night, I stopped at a corner store, bought a cheap frame, and hung a photo of my kids on the wall. It was from years ago, their faces smudged with ice cream, smiling at a fair. I stood back, the frame slightly crooked, and felt the quiet settle, not heavy, just there. I lay on the mattress that night, the ceiling fan clicking above me, and thought about the envelope now tucked away in a box. It wasn't my shield anymore. I'd used it, said what I needed to, and let it go. The stillness wasn't peace, not exactly, but it was mine. I closed my eyes, the fan's rhythm steady, and let the world be small for a moment, just me and the dark. Years have passed, and the apartment isn't bare anymore. I've got a couch now, a second-hand one, with a sagging cushion, but it fits. The walls hold a few photos. My son at a soccer game, his grin wide after a goal. A shot of the shop's crew, Clarence in the back, with a rare smile. My daughter's face isn't on the wall yet, but I keep a spot open just in case. I wake up early now, not because I have to, but because the morning's quiet feels like a gift. My son visits most weekends, his bag heavier, each time stuffed with clothes and books. We cook sometimes simple stuff like burgers or eggs, the kitchen filling with the sizzle of grease. He talks more now about school, his friends, even his mom, though I don't ask. Last week, he asked about the shop, if I teach him to fix a carburetor. I said sure, my voice steady, but my chest warmed like a light flickering on. Work is different too. I'm not just a mechanic now. I'm the guy Felix comes to, with questions, his hands less clumsy each week. I show him how to listen for an engine's misfire, my words patient, clear. The shop's noise doesn't swallow me anymore. It's just part of the rhythm. Clarence still tosses me rags, but he lingers sometimes, asking about my runs or the barbecue he's planning. I nod, say, I'll come, and mean it. Ruth's around, not often, but enough. We talk at Clarence's gatherings, her laugh easy over the crackle of the grill. She's a nurse, works long shifts, and doesn't push when I keep things light. Once she brought me a coffee at the shop, said it was on her way. I thanked her, held the cup too long, its warmth seeping into my hands. I don't call her, don't ask for more, but I don't mind her stopping by. I run most evenings, the sidewalks familiar now, my steps sure, even in the dark. The corner store's clerk knows me, slides my change across the counter with a nod. I bought a plant last month, a small cactus, its spines sharp but still green. It sits on the windowsill, catching the morning light. I water it carefully, not sure if I'm doing it right, but it hasn't died yet. My daughter's still quiet, her texts rare short. I saw her at a school play last month, her face painted for the stage, her voice clear in a way I hadn't heard before. I clapped from the back, my hands steady, and left before she saw me. I didn't need her to wave back. I drove home, the road dark, the radio off, and felt the ache settle, not gone, but softer, like a stone smoothed by water. I sat at my table tonight, the cactus casting a small shadow. The notebook's in the drawer, its pages full, but I don't write much anymore. The words I needed are outspoken or not. I sipped my coffee, the mug warm, and looked out the window, the streetlight steady in the dark. The world felt small again, but not heavy, just still. I stood up from the table, the coffee mug cool now, and walked to the window. The street below was empty, just parked cars and a stray cat slipping through shadows. I didn't pity Anita anymore, didn't hate her either. She'd made her choices, built a life on lies that crumbled when I opened that envelope. I didn't need to win, didn't need her to see my side. I just needed to be here, whole for my kids, for myself. That was enough. My son's visits are regular now, his laughter filling the apartment when we play cards or watch old movies. He asked me last week why I fought for him, his voice quiet, like he was afraid of the answer. I looked at him, his eyes searching, and said, "Because you're mine." He nodded, didn't push, and we went back to the movie, the popcorn bowl between us. My daughter's still distant, but she sent a photo last month, a selfie from a school trip, her smile small, but there. I saved it, didn't reply, just let it sit on my phone, a crack in the wall between us. Ruth and I talk sometimes, usually at Clarence's, her voice steady over the clink of beer bottles. She told me about her brother, how he lost everything in a divorce and never rebuilt. I listened, my hands around a bottle, and said I was trying not to be that guy. She nodded, her eyes soft, and didn't ask for more. I don't know if we'll ever be anything, but I like that she doesn't expect me to be someone I'm not. The shop's my rhythm now. I fixed a truck yesterday, its engine purring clean when I was done. Felix watched, taking notes, his pencil scratching. I didn't say much, just showed him the steps, my hands sure. When I run in the evenings, the town feels smaller, the streets familiar, like I belong to them again. The cactus on my windowsill is still alive, its green brighter than I expected. I water it, check its soil, and feel a quiet pride that I haven't killed it. I don't look at the envelope anymore. It's in a box under the bed, with the divorce papers and a few old bills. I don't need it to remind me what I did. I spoke my truth, not to hurt her, but to keep myself from disappearing. That's what I carry now. Not anger, not loss, but the weight of being seen by my son, by Ruth, by the guy I see in the mirror. It's not perfect, but it's mine. What's a truth you've held on to, one you never said out loud? If this story hits something in you, give it a like, maybe share it with someone who'd get it. Subscribe if you want more. Thanks for listening, for staying with me. I'm Leontine, and this is where I leave it for now.